Hi, I'm Matt. I'm going to show you around our bee yard, which we call an apiary. So in this video, we're going to give you kind of an overview of a lot of aspects of beekeeping.
Beekeepers wear suits to protect them from the bees. So the hat part is called a veil, and it is a mesh material so that the bees can't get to the beekeeper, but the beekeeper can still see. And then there's a jacket, and then usually leather gloves as well, because sometimes the bees will sting your fingers and the leather prevents the stinger from getting down to your hands. And then usually long, kind of thick material pants, and then we'll wear usually like leather shoes or thick shoes, and then usually have socks that are containing the bottom of the pant legs so that the bees can't climb up into the beekeeper's pants.
Everybody always wants to know about stinging. Well, we wear the protective gear mainly because stinging is kind of a hassle. It slows down the work that we do, and the stingers can't go through the material itself, so it saves us trying to dig out a stinger. Stinging does hurt, it does happen, but mostly the bees are very friendly, and as long as we don't bother them too much, they don't really bother us, and they'll let us go around and work in the hive. Bees are very curious. They watch what we do very closely, and they'll follow us around sometimes, but mostly they just kind of get out of the way as best they can, and we try to be very gentle so that we don't hurt any. There's a saying in beekeeping that on a hot day, if you feel things running down your back, that's sweat. But if you feel sweat running up your back, that's a bee. Okay, so this is a typical hive tool that we use. It has several different parts. This part is used like a lever, and that hooks the edges of those wood frames so that I can pull them out. We also have this flat edge, which we use for scraping off wax and for separating the frames when they're stuck together. You can kind of jam it in there and pry them loose. And then this is a larger lever arm that I can use to also pull frames out of the hive, or I can use it to pull them this way or push them that way. And we use this for pretty much everything we do, including the smoker, as you saw. And it's a very, very versatile tool.
So we're lighting the smoker now. Matt's lighting the smoker. So we're starting out with some brown paper and then getting some pieces of cardboard that will fit into the smoker. And he's using the bellows to get oxygen. He's getting air into it. So now Matt has refilled the fuel, and the goal is to have it flames coming out the top. And you want there to be enough fuel so that you can do your work and you don't keep having to refuel it. You can see all the smoke. Okay, now the lid is on and the smoke is just coming out of the little opening there. We can use it if we need it.
There are 3 types of bees in the hive. There's the queen bee. The queen's abdomen is longer so that she can back that down into the cells and lay the eggs. That's why she's longer than all the other bees, is so she can get all the way down to the bottom. And there are the worker bees. The worker bees are all female, and they are the majority of the population, and they do all of the foraging and all of the honey gathering, all of the pollen, all of the cleaning. They do everything. And there are the drones. The drones are the male bees, and they pretty much just eat honey and yeah. So most of the bees in a hive are female, and they have a life cycle that is a little over a month long most of the time. Once they go from larvae to covered brood, and then they'll hatch. They'll basically climb their way out of that wax covering, and you'll be able to spot them in the hive because the backs of them are very bright yellow and fuzzy because they haven't worn off yet from walking around the hive. For the first 1 or 2 days of their life, they clean the cells, including the cell that they just came out of, so that they're prepared for the next task. From day 3 to day 11, they'll take care of the larvae, which are the bees even younger than them, sort of like looking after your baby brother or baby sister. From day 12 to 17 of their lives, they will build new cells and create wax and places to store more honey and pollen. From day 18 to 21, they'll work the front door. They'll be guard bees, and they'll keep an eye on the outside of the hive to make sure that nobody's coming in that doesn't belong. And then on day 22, after they've served as guard bees, they will start flying around the outside of the hive and kind of hovering near the entrance and looking at the front of the hive and learning where it is. And they'll gradually spread farther and farther away from the hive. This is called orienting, just kind of learning where their place in the world is. And then from day 22, they will spend the rest of their lives out in the world foraging for nectar and pollen. There's no light in the hives, so the bees communicate by bumping into each other and buzzing. They'll actually kind of say, "Excuse me." But mostly they communicate by scent, pheromones. Those scents can mean anything from there's danger to the hive to, hey, we're moving, to we need to have more bees upstairs, more bees downstairs. They do all sorts of things with those scents, but primarily it keeps them in the same area as their queen, so they know that their hive is their hive. It smells different because of the different queens. Each queen has their own scent. We try to be very gentle with the bees. If one gets hurt, they will release what is known as an alarm pheromone. It's sort of like a cry for help. And that pheromone can spread very quickly as everybody wants to come and help that bee, defend that bee. So it's sort of like pulling a fire alarm in your school. Everybody reacts all at the same time. So we use the smoke to sort of disrupt that signal from spreading very far so that we don't end up with a whole lot of bees taking to the air and making it hard for us to see. And that does happen, and you almost can't see through them. They get so thick. So the smoke helps spread out and sort of diffuse that alarm pheromone and allows us to keep working, even if we accidentally hurt somebody. So when we're working on the hive, we obviously send a lot of bees up into the air. One of the interesting things that we notice is that the bees will line up on the outside of the hive and they will fan the scent and try and spread it as far as they can so that everybody who got lost can find their way home. They also do this during swarm season. Swarm season is when the bees will take off and look for a new place to live and leave a new queen in the old hive, and the old queen will take off with the bees. Here you can see video of a swarm that we caught on our back deck. The queen is inside the box, and the bees are fanning, half of them basically are fanning the scent to spread around so that the other half of the bees all march right up into the new box where the queen is. So this is a typical hive. It's set up right now for winter, so it is a little shorter than it would be in the main part of the season. It has two of the large boxes that the bees actually live in, these two boxes, and the queen is somewhere inside this range. That sits on an entrance area. This metal piece is to keep the mice from going inside, but the bees can land here and walk into the hive, and they can smell that that's their hive. They also will use visual cues like the way the tape is arranged or plants that are nearby so they know they have the right hive, but mainly they smell their queen. So they live in these two boxes, and then everything above here in season will add other boxes. Those are the boxes where the honey goes so that we can take them off and harvest the honey. So right now what we have on the top is a small spacer here, and inside there is sugar supplies, sugar bricks, to help them during winter time. During the winter they like to use this upper entrance because it doesn't get covered with snow like the bottom one does. And then above that is some ventilation and some insulation to help them stay warm during the coldest part of the year.
So Matt is going to use the smoker to just put a tiny little bit of smoke there at either entrance. In the wintertime, we use these solid pieces of insulation on the top to provide some extra insulation for the bees, and we don't use that during the summertime. Here is a different hive than we showed you previously, but you'll notice that on this hive, the bees are preferring to go in the lower entrance, and they're not preferring to go through the upper entrance, just something that they've decided. So here is the setup that we have for the winter. So the wood that you see on the side there is a spacer so that there's space enough to put these sugar bricks as backup food for them to have in the wintertime. And we can make these sugar bricks at home with just sugar that we buy at the store. And you can see that they've eaten out the center part there. So now Matt is lifting out the frame using some Hive Tools. Today's a very warm day, so they're very active today. if it was a very cold day, first of all, we wouldn't be going in the hive. But second of all, they'd be all clustered around the eggs and larvae, keeping them warm instead of, and there are some, of course, doing that at all times, but they don't have to be as concerned about chilling of the brood, as they would say. The brood are the eggs and the larvae. So we're looking at, so you can see the bright yellow pollen in there, and pollen is comes from plants, and it's a protein source for the young bees, the larvae, and really all the bees to eat. So they put it right there where it's convenient to feed to the larvae. But you can see a clump of honey up here, so it's all covered over. That's honey right there that they gathered probably last fall. Okay, you can see that there was some space here above the spacer, and the bees ate the sugar that was there, and now they have decided to build comb. They don't like empty space, so they figure that they'll fill it in with some comb.
This frame is pretty empty because it's winter time, but you can still see how the bees use it. In the middle, there are covered cells that have bees that are getting ready to hatch out. Some of the cells near them aren't covered yet, and you can still see the white larvae inside. On the edges of those brood cells, you can see brightly colored pollen, yellow, red, sometimes green. And farther out is the covered honey. When it's cold, the bees stay on top of the brood to keep them warm. This day was pretty warm, so the bees were moving around, and if you look, you can see the queen. The queen can be hard to find, but once you know what to look for, it's a lot easier. She's quite a bit bigger than the other bees and has a very long abdomen. Drones are easy to spot too. We don't have any right now, but they're kind of fatter, have larger eyes, and no stingers, so their tail is kind of blunt. The foraging bees will go out for several miles. They go very, very far looking for nectar and pollen. Sometimes they're just after nectar and they get pollen by accident. Other times they're actually looking for the pollen. Sometimes the best source of pollen is right outside their door. We have these in Pennsylvania, at least, called skunk cabbage. And they have a little opening here, which I'm going to break this one so you can see. And inside there is pollen. You can see it inside the leaves. See that powdery stuff in there? This is all pollen, and this is what the bees are gathering. So they'll fly into these skunk cabbages. Here's one that's still together, and they'll rattle around in here and get pollen all over themselves, including that they pack into their pollen baskets. And that is one of the first pollen sources they have here.
Okay, so we wanted to show you some pollen going in on the pollen baskets of these bees. You can see the little yellow bits. That is pollen that they have found somewhere. Actually, the different colors of pollen come from different plants. And also, one of the roles that bees play during their lifetime is being a guard bee. So they're kind of the security guards, making sure that bees from other hives or other even kinds of insects like a wasp or a hornet can't come in and get the honey and so on. So the importance of pollen is that it is a protein source for the young bees and the larvae, which are needed to build up the population of bees so that when the spring nectar flow comes, there will be enough bees to collect all of the nectar that they're going to need to make the honey that they're going to be needing to eat through the remainder of the year.
The pollen, when it was returned to the hive, is packed tightly into the cells so that they can feed that to the young bees. Basically, pollen is for baby bees and honey is for adult bees. When the bees find honey or nectar in a place that they like, they'll come back to the hive and they tell all of their friends, basically. They'll do a dance around the hive that the bees can decode to help them find where it came from. And the hive will send out more bees to places that they know are good. When they go into the flowers and collect the nectar, they put it into a part of their body that's called their honey stomach, and they fly back to the hive. It's actually interesting. You can see when the bees are approaching the hive, they fly lower when they're full of nectar because the nectar is so heavy. Bees that come back with less nectar come in really, really high. When that nectar is put into the honey cells, they dehydrate it, they sit on top of it and fan their wings to dry it out, and turn it into a thicker material that we call honey. That honey is what they use as their primary food source. The thing is that bees are so industrious, they're so busy, they work so hard, they usually create a lot more honey than they actually need, which is why we have extra boxes that we put on top to collect the extra honey. That extra honey we put in jars, and they get to keep the rest. So to harvest the honey, you'll notice that some of the pictures show the hives are much taller. Those are the honey supers, the honey boxes. We will go through and we will find honey that has been capped. That means that when the honey is ready and the bees have dried it out, they'll put a wax capping, a lid, on all of the cells. We really only harvest the honey that is capped because it has to be the right moisture content for it to be safe to keep on your shelves. Once we have a box that's full of capped honey, we take those boxes up to our house. There we test the honey to make sure that it's dried out properly, and then we will cut the cappings off of each frame. We put the frames into the extractor, which is basically a centrifuge, and we spin those frames around and all the honey flies out to the sides and then drips down into the middle where there's a drain that goes into a bucket. As the honey is drained out of the extractor, it goes through a filter to take out any pieces of wax that might have gotten flung off in the process. And then we use those buckets to fill up our jars. We use a lot of jars because we use standard glass jars. If I find a good deal on jars, I buy out the store. Of course, all those jars have to be washed, which is a big project in itself. Then they're lined up, full of honey, lids are put on, and we put our labels on. In the Pittsburgh area, we get 2 harvests a year, typically. One of the harvests is in the middle of the summer, which is all the spring honey, and then we have one that's in the late fall, which is all of the fall honey. The hives are in the same place, but of course there's different things blooming, so the honey is a different color. It also tastes different. Spring honey has kind of a light flavor, it's very sweet, and fall honey has a richer, deeper flavor. And then we sell that honey at local fairs. All right, thanks for coming and taking a look around with me. And if you're ever in the area, buy some honey.